Number 1. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier. A quiet Saturday in late spring, a walk into the trees, and a decision that would echo for a decade. Three 12-year-olds stepped off a suburban path in Waukesha, Wisconsin on the 31st of May 2014, and only one would come back under her own power. The internet myth they'd whispered about suddenly felt closer than air. Then the woods went still. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier were smart, imaginative middle schoolers. They drew, they joked, they traded stories online. Like countless kids, they discovered a tall, faceless figure, born on forums and creepypasta threads, Slender Man, a fiction treated like folklore. For Morgan, who was already struggling with early-onset mental illness, the boundary between story and reality thinned. Anissa, anxious to belong, found herself orbiting Morgan's belief. Together, they fed the same fire, clicking through pages late at night, convincing each other they'd been chosen. It sounded like fantasy. It hardened into a plan. After a sleepover for Morgan's 12th birthday, the girls suggested a walk to a nearby park. Their classmate, Peyton Leutner, funny, loyal, and trusting, went along. The mood felt ordinary. It wasn't. Away from parents and pavement, the two led Peyton deeper among the trees. What followed was a flurry of motion and terror that cannot be undone. Peyton suffered multiple wounds. The girls, panicked and convinced of a delusion, told her to lie still while they got help, then left. The plan was to reach a make-believe mansion in the North Woods and become proxies. The myth had become their map. But just when the quiet seemed final, Peyton moved. Crawling through leaves and pain, Peyton made it to a bike path near the road. A passing cyclist saw a child on the ground and called for help. Surgeons would later describe how close the injuries came to vital structures. Survival was measured in millimeters and minutes. Meanwhile, police found Morgan and Anissa walking near Interstate 94, the fantasy already collapsing. In interviews, the girls spoke about Slender Man, as if he were listening, as if obedience kept their families safe. It stunned investigators, two honors students speaking with the certainty of fear. Prosecutors charged both as adults, as Wisconsin law then allowed for serious offenses. The community faced a raw question. How do you treat children whose acts are catastrophic when belief and illness bend judgment? In 2017, the legal machinery reached a pivotal consensus. Anissa pleaded guilty to being a party to attempted second-degree intentional homicide. A jury then found her not responsible by reason of mental disease or defect. Morgan took a plea to attempted first-degree intentional homicide and was likewise found not responsible due to serious mental illness, including schizophrenia diagnosed by court-appointed experts. The courtroom tone was grave, clinical, less about punishment than protection and treatment. Still, the consequences were enormous. In early 2018, the sentences made headlines. Morgan was committed to a state mental health institution for up to 40 years, an indeterminate term focused on treatment and public safety. Anissa received up to 25 years under the same framework, confinement, followed by years of strict community supervision if ever released. These numbers weren't about a prison clock. They were the outer limits of commitment, revisited only if progress and risk assessments justified a step down. The message was clear. The state would move slowly, carefully, and only with evidence. Time passed. Peyton rebuilt her life, graduations, plans, a future wrestled back from the edge. In 2021, after 7 years of treatment, a Wisconsin judge granted Anissa conditional release to live with a parent under GPS monitoring, therapy, and constant oversight. Each review hearing tested whether accountability and safety could live in the same sentence. It did not end the story. It changed its setting. Then, attention turned to Morgan. Across 2024 and into 2025, clinicians and the court debated whether Morgan's progress, medication compliance, and insight into her illness supported a transition. Concerns surfaced, were examined, and weighed. Ultimately, in mid-2025, a judge approved a conditional release plan. Morgan could leave the hospital to a supervised group home placement with GPS tracking, intensive treatment, and tight restrictions managed by the Department of Health Services. The original 40-year commitment still frames her life. The conditions now frame each day. It wasn't freedom. It was a controlled bridge back to ordinary light. Pulling back, the case became a national mirror. It asked how digital myths can tangle with developing minds, how delusion can mimic devotion, and how a justice system handles children who cause near-fatal harm while living inside an illness. It also delivered a concrete answer: dates, hearings, rulings, and the disciplined patience of review. Peyton's survival is the center of that story, a young person who refused to let the woods be the last word. On the 31st of May 2014, imagination and illness met in a park and almost ended a life. More than a decade later, the system's response is still unfolding in measured steps. Accountability remains. Treatment continues, and a survivor moved forward, proof that courage can be quiet and relentless. Number 2. Rachel Shoaf and Shelia Eddy. Just after midnight on the 6th of July 2012, a bedroom window quietly slid open in Star City, West Virginia. 16-year-old Skylar Neese stepped outside, expecting a summer night of laughter with her two best friends. She didn't know it was the last time she would see home. Skylar, Rachel Shoaf, and Shelia Eddy had been inseparable since middle school. They went to the same high school, shared secrets, sleepovers, and social media posts that made their friendship look unbreakable. Skylar was smart, independent, and focused on her future. But over time, tension began to grow. Arguments, jealousy, and shifting loyalties quietly settled in. What should have been ordinary teenage drama slowly turned into something far darker. That night, Rachel and Shelia picked Skylar up in a silver sedan. They told her they were heading out to drive around and smoke like they had before. Instead, they crossed the state line into rural Pennsylvania and stopped on a dark, isolated road near woods they already knew. Hidden beneath their sweatshirts were kitchen knives and a plan. When Skylar turned to grab something from the car, they counted to 3 and attacked. It was sudden, brutal, and deliberate. After it was over, they covered her body with branches, got back into the car, and drove home as if nothing had happened. By morning, Skylar's parents found her bedroom empty, her window open, and her phone missing. At first, police believed she had run away, but Skylar's father insisted something else was wrong. His daughter had taken no clothes, no money, and left without her contacts or charger. For weeks, Rachel and Shelia acted heartbroken, posting messages online begging for their friend to come home. They attended vigils, comforted Skylar's parents, and pretended to help search. Meanwhile, investigators started to notice inconsistencies in their stories. As weeks turned into months, suspicion settled on the two girls. Surveillance footage from the apartment complex showed Skylar voluntarily getting into their car that night, confirming they were the last to see her. Still, both denied knowing what happened. Then, in December 2012, everything cracked. Overwhelmed by guilt and stress, Rachel had a breakdown and was hospitalized. Soon after, she confessed to police. She led them to the remote woods in Pennsylvania on the 3rd of January 2013. Snow covered the ground, but investigators eventually found Skylar's remains exactly where she said they would be. Rachel's confession shocked the community, but Shelia refused to admit any involvement. She continued tweeting, laughing at school, and behaving as though nothing had changed. But now, the evidence was undeniable. Blood was found in the car. Cell phone records placed them at the scene. Rachel agreed to testify against Shelia in exchange for a reduced charge. In May 2013, Rachel Shoaf pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She tearfully admitted her role in court and apologized to Skylar's family. In January 2014, Shelia Eddy finally pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. She showed little emotion as the judge sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Rachel received 30 years with the chance for parole after 10. The legal process didn't end with the sentences. Skylar's parents pushed for change. Because Skylar had been labeled a runaway, an Amber Alert was never issued. In response, West Virginia passed Skylar's Law, requiring authorities to issue alerts missing children, even if foul play isn't immediately suspected. Today, Rachel Shoaf is held at Lakin Correctional Center, eligible for parole in the early 2020s. Shelia Eddy remains in prison under a life sentence, her earliest possible parole in 2028. Skylar's parents continue to honor their daughter's memory, reminding others how quickly ordinary teenage life can fracture into tragedy. A girl disappeared from her bedroom window, and two friends walked away, believing no one would ever know. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and this one changed a town, a law, and 3 families forever. Number 3. Tylar Witt. Just after midnight on the 11th of June, 2009, a quiet house in El Dorado Hills, California, became the scene of a calculated betrayal. 14-year-old Tylar Witt and her 19-year-old boyfriend, Stephen Culver, believed they had only one way to stay together, by removing the one person who stood in their way: Tylar's mother, Joanne Witt. Tylar grew up as a bright girl from a Dalminic stable home. Her mother, Joanne, was a dedicated engineer and single parent who worked hard to provide structure and security. But during her early teens, Tylar's behavior shifted. She became distant, rebellious, and increasingly drawn to older boys and darker influences. When she met Stephen Culver, a 19-year-old struggling musician with no steady job, she idolized him. Their relationship quickly intensified into obsession. Joanne, concerned about the age difference and Stephen's influence, tried to end the relationship. She contacted authorities and agreed to testify against Stephen for unlawful involvement with a minor. Tylar viewed this as a personal betrayal. Tension at home escalated. What began as teenage defiance slowly turned into something far more dangerous. Together, Tylar and Stephen began planning. They discussed details in journals and text messages, convinced that once Joanne was gone, they could live freely. On the night of the crime, Joanne went to bed unaware of the danger in her own home. Tylar disabled the alarm system and unlocked the door. While Joanne slept, Stephen entered the bedroom with a knife. Tylar stood by as her mother was attacked and, in some accounts, participated. Joanne was injured dozens of times. The quiet of the house was replaced with irreversible silence. Afterward, the couple cleaned up, took money, and fled. They drove to San Francisco and tried to disappear in crowds and nightlife. Shockingly, they posed for photos at a rave, as if nothing had happened. 2 days later, Joanne's co-workers, concerned when she failed to show up for work, contacted authorities. Police discovered her in the home. Soon after, Tylar and Stephen were located at a friend's apartment in San Francisco and arrested without resistance. Questioned separately, they immediately began blaming one another. Tylar claimed Stephen acted alone. Stephen insisted Tylar planned everything, but investigators found journals, messages, and physical evidence, proving it was a joint effort. Tylar's writings included chilling lines about wanting her mother gone and dreams of running away with Stephen. Because of the premeditated nature of the crime, prosecutors charged Tylar as an adult with first-degree murder under the special circumstance of lying in wait. This made her one of the youngest individuals in California to face such a charge. Her defense argued she was manipulated by an older boyfriend and suffered emotional abuse. Prosecutors countered that Tylar was a willing participant who helped plan every step. In 2011, facing the possibility of life without parole, Tylar accepted a plea deal for first-degree murder and testified against Stephen. She was sentenced to 15 years to life. Stephen Culver went to trial, was found guilty of first-degree murder with lying in wait, and received the same sentence, 15 years to life in prison. Years later, Tylar expressed regret in interviews and parole hearings, saying she wished she could take it back. In 2019, she appeared before the parole board for the first time. They denied her request, citing concerns about her insight, maturity at the time, and the severity of the crime. Today, Tylar Witt remains incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility. She won't be eligible for parole again until later in the decade. Stephen Culver is held in a separate state prison, also serving his life sentence. A mother's attempt to protect her daughter cost her life. A teenager's desperation, paired with manipulation and fantasy, led to a decision that destroyed 3 lives in one night, leaving behind a story not of romance, but of consequence. Number 4. Alyssa Bustamante. On an October evening in 2009, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton never made it home from a friend's house. She was minutes from safety, walking through a familiar neighborhood in Street Martins, Missouri. But waiting in the woods was someone she trusted, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante, who had already decided what would happen next. Alyssa Bustamante's life was a picture of contrast. She was a high school student with good grades, a church youth group attendee, and the oldest of 4 siblings being raised by their grandparents because of their parents' struggles with addiction. To outsiders, she was quiet, troubled, but manageable. Yet beneath that, Alyssa battled depression, self-harm, and fascination with dark thoughts. She openly posted about these feelings online. Friends said she was unpredictable, sometimes fun, sometimes withdrawn, and sometimes disturbingly blunt about her curiosity toward violence. Days before Elizabeth's disappearance, Alyssa dug 2 shallow graves in a secluded patch of woods behind her home. No one knew why. On October 21, she put her plan into action. Elizabeth, a cheerful 4th grader who adored her family and loved playing with Alyssa's younger sister, was the perfect target, trusting, nearby, and small enough to overpower. Alyssa lured her toward the trees under the guise of playing outside. What happened next was intentional and merciless. When Elizabeth didn't return home, her family immediately panicked. She was afraid of the dark. She never stayed out late. Law enforcement, neighbors, and volunteers searched the woods and streets through the night. Alyssa even helped search, acting confused and worried. But investigators noticed inconsistencies in her story. Her behavior wasn't grief, it was tension. 2 days later, detectives began focusing on Alyssa. Her diary entries, internet history, and demeanor suggested something more than a missing child case. Under questioning, she led them into the woods. In a shallow grave covered with leaves and branches, they found Elizabeth. The truth emerged. Alyssa had plotted the entire act simply to know what it felt like to kill. Her personal diary confirmed it. The discovery stunned even seasoned investigators. This wasn't a moment of rage, it was pre-planned. She had chosen the day, the place, and her victim, and she wrote about it afterward in chillingly casual language. This diary entry became crucial evidence. Alyssa was arrested and charged as an adult with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. Her defense team argued she was a severely depressed teenager with a damaged upbringing and untreated mental health issues. Prosecutors countered that her actions were deliberate, calculated, and showed clear intent. In 2012, just before trial, Alyssa accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action to avoid a mandatory life sentence without parole. The judge sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole plus 30 years. With this structure, she won't be eligible for release until at least 2054, when she'll be in her late 52nd. The courtroom was filled with grief. Elizabeth's family spoke about birthdays she would never reach and an empty bedroom still filled with for her toys. Alyssa apologized, but for many, it felt too late and too hollow. The case sparked national conversations about juvenile crime, mental health, and whether teenagers who commit such acts should ever be free again. Today, Alyssa Bustamante remains imprisoned in Missouri. She continues treatment and education programs behind bars. She has never challenged her sentence or filed for early release. Elizabeth's family still lives with the absence left behind that autumn evening. A child walking home, a teenager consumed by darkness, 2 lives collided, and only one truth remained. Some actions redraw the line between childhood and cruelty forever. Number 5. Jasmine Richardson. In a quiet Canadian suburb in April 2006, a young girl stood in her driveway, staring at flashing police lights. Inside her home were the bodies of her parents and younger brother. Within hours, police discovered something even more shocking. The 2-year-old survivor they thought they were rescuing was actually responsible. Jasmine Richardson seemed like an ordinary preteen from Medicine Hat, Alberta. She came from a loving middle-class family. Her parents, Mark and Deborah, cared deeply for her, encouraged school, sports, and a stable life. But at 11 years old, Jasmine was drawn into online Gothic communities, horror roleplay sites, and older peers who romanticized rebellion. There, she met 3-year-old Jeremy Steinke. Jeremy was different from anyone Jasmine knew. He dressed in dark clothing, spoke about the occult, and claimed he was a 300-year-old werewolf. To Jasmine, struggling with identity and adolescence, he felt like freedom someone who listened. Their relationship developed quickly, secretly, and intensely. When her parents found out, they forbade all contact. What they saw as protection, Jasmine saw as imprisonment. The couple began sending each other messages about running away. Soon, the conversations turned darker. They started discussing killing Jasmine's family. Friends thought it was dramatic teenage talk. It wasn't. On the night of the 22nd of April, 2006, Jeremy brought a knife to the Richardson home. Jasmine let him in. He went upstairs to her parents' bedroom. Mark and Deborah fought to defend themselves, but both were repeatedly attacked. Meanwhile, Jasmine stayed downstairs, waiting. Then came the most haunting step. Jasmine went to her little brother Jacob's room, just 8 years old, and Jeremy followed. Jacob pleaded for his life. What happened next remains partly unclear. Jeremy admitted to the attack, but evidence suggested Jasmine may have participated. When they left the house, her entire family was gone. The next morning, a neighbor child saw Jacob's body through a window and called the police. Officers entered the house expecting a surviving daughter to rescue. Instead, they found her missing and assumed she'd been abducted. But within hours, suspicions shifted. Jasmine wasn't taken, she was gone by choice. Police tracked Jasmine and Jeremy to a town in Saskatchewan, over 80 miles away. They were arrested outside a friend's home, laughing, holding hands, and making plans for the future. The town of Medicine Hat was stunned. How could a 1-2-year-old be involved in such a crime? Under Canadian law, Jasmine could not be tried as an adult for offenses committed under age 14. She was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and became the youngest person in Canadian history to be convicted of multiple killings. In 2007, Jasmine was sentenced to the maximum possible under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, 10 years. This included 4 years in a psychiatric facility, followed by time in a community program with strict conditions. Jeremy Steinke, who was 23 at the time of the murders, was tried as an adult. He received 3 life sentences, 1 for each family member, with eligibility for parole after 25 years. While in custody, Jasmine underwent intensive counseling and education. By 2016, she had completed her sentence, changed her name, and quietly re-entered society at age 23. Her release sparked controversy across Canada. Some believed she had been successfully rehabilitated. Others argued no amount of time or therapy could balance such a crime. Today, she lives privately, her location undisclosed. Jeremy remains incarcerated in a Canadian prison, still serving his life sentence. 3 lives were lost. 1 was forever altered, and a small city in Alberta learned how deeply darkness can hide beneath the surface of adolescence. Number 6. Holly Harvey and Sandra Ketchum. It began with a handwritten checklist scribbled across a teenage girl's arm in blue pen. 4 words: kill, keys, money, jewelry. It wasn't a joke or a dare. It was a plan. Holly Harvey was 15 when her life took a sharp turn. Her mother was struggling with addiction and legal issues, so Holly was sent to live with her grandparents, Carl and Sarah Collier, in Fayetteville, Georgia. The Colliers did everything they could to give her stability, strict rules, early curfews, no trouble. But to Holly, it felt like a cage. The one thing that made her feel free was her relationship with 16-year-old Sandra Ketchum. The 2 girls were deeply dependent on each other emotionally, obsessively, and without boundaries. Holly's grandparents disapproved of the relationship, partly due to their age and behavior. They limited Holly's phone access, internet, and ability to see Sandra. To the teens, it was betrayal. Their answer was not to escape, at least not without removing the people in their way. In August 2004, the plan formed. They wrote it out, rehearsed it, and chose a day. Holly would distract her grandmother in the kitchen, while Sandra waited nearby. Holly grabbed a kitchen knife and attacked. Her grandmother tried to fight back, but the assault continued. Hearing screams, Carl Collier rushed inside, only to be met by the 2 teens. He was wounded multiple times while trying to protect his wife. Within minutes, both grandparents were gone. Holly and Sandra ransacked the house, took cash, credit cards, and the Collier's truck. They left behind blood, chaos, and a scene that would haunt detectives for years. They drove to the coast of South Carolina, where they bought fast food, cigarettes, and even enjoyed the beach. But they didn't get far. Within days, police tracked them to Tybee Island. When arrested, neither cried. Holly reportedly asked only if they could stay together. Authorities searching her found the checklist still inked on her skin. During questioning, Holly described the events with striking calmness. Sandra, quieter and more reserved, admitted she helped. Both were charged with 2 counts of murder. Prosecutors considered the death penalty, despite their ages, due to the brutality involved. To avoid that, both girls accepted plea deals. In 2005, Holly Harvey pleaded guilty to 2 counts of malice murder and received 2 consecutive life sentences. Sandra Ketchum pleaded guilty to 3 counts 2 for murder, 1 for armed robbery, and received 3 life sentences. In court, members of the Collier family spoke through grief, expressing not only heartbreak, but disbelief that their own granddaughter could do this. Holly offered an apology. Sandra wept. But for many, the damage was beyond repair. Today, both women are still incarcerated in Georgia state prisons. Holly is housed at Lee Arrendale State Prison. Sandra remains in a separate facility. Neither is eligible for parole anytime soon. The case forced the public to confront uncomfortable truths: how far teenage obsession can go, how quickly love can twist into violence, and how 2 girls barely old enough to drive could destroy the very people who cared for them. Number 7. Cindy Collier and Shirley Wolf. On a summer afternoon in June 1983, 2 teenage girls knocked on the door of an elderly woman's home in Auburn, California. They asked to Black Today use her phone. Minutes later, 5-year-old Anna Brackett lay lifeless, and the nation would soon learn just how far 2 15-year-olds were willing to go. Cindy Collier and Shirley Wolf were both 15 and living in a group home for troubled youth. They had histories of running away, petty theft, and unstable family lives. They weren't considered violent, just defiant, impulsive, and rebellious. But after escaping the group home together, they claimed they needed money, a car, and a way out of California. What followed was not desperation, it was deliberate. They wandered into Anna Brackett's quiet neighborhood. Anna lived alone and was known for her kindness. When the girls knocked and politely asked to use her phone, she let them in. Once inside, the tone changed. They grabbed knives from her kitchen. The attack was sudden and brutal. Anna was stabbed multiple times and struck with household objects. The girls then searched the home for valuables, took small items, money, and, finally, her car keys. They drove away in Anna's vehicle, still wearing the clothes they had on during the killing. Police quickly connected the stolen car to reports from the group home and tracked them down within hours. They didn't resist arrest. What stunned investigators wasn't just the crime itself, it was the girls' response to it. In their statements, Cindy and Shirley showed little guilt. They joked, smoked cigarettes, and seemed more afraid of being separated than of the charges they faced. At one point, Shirley even wrote in her journal, "Today, Cindy and I ran away and killed an old lady. It was fun." This attitude shook the public. People struggled to understand how 2 teenage girls could display such cold indifference. Newspapers dubbed them thrill killers. Prosecutors, convinced the crime was intentional and unprovoked, charged both as adults rare at the time for offenders their age. In court, neither girl showed much emotion. Their defense argued they were products of abuse, neglect, and a broken system. The prosecution countered with their lack of remorse and the brutality of the act. The jury took little time to decide. Both Cindy Collier and Shirley Wolf were convicted of first-degree murder. They received sentences of 25 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving a full 25 years. When Cindy and Shirley became eligible for parole in the late 2000s and early 2010 seconds, both were denied. Parole boards cited their continued lack of accountability, concerns about public safety, and the calculated nature of the crime. Cindy remains in a California women's prison. Shirley, now known as Shirley Catherine Wolf, has also remained behind bars after being denied parole multiple times. Their case became a landmark example in California law. It challenged the belief that young girls were incapable of extreme violence and influenced future decisions about trying juveniles as adults. A kind woman opened her door to help two teenagers. In return, she lost her life, and those teenagers lost their futures. One moment of misplaced trust sparked a case that would redefine how the justice system looks at youth, violence, and remorse. Number 8. Sarah Johnson. The morning of the 2nd of September, 2003, started with silence in the Johnson home in Bellevue, Idaho. It didn't take long for that silence to become alarm. 16-year-old Sarah Johnson ran to a neighbor's house, crying that someone had broken in and attacked her parents. But investigators would soon learn that the danger didn't come from outside. It came from their own daughter. Sarah seemed like the perfect small-town teenager, honor student, volleyball player, well-liked. Her parents, Alan and Diane Johnson, were loving and involved, but also firm. Tension grew when Sarah began dating one 9-year-old Bruno Santos. Her parents disapproved, not only because of his age, but because they believed he was a bad influence. They banned her from seeing him. Sarah ignored the rule. Arguments escalated. And then it went beyond teenage rebellion. In the early hours of that September morning, while her parents slept in their bedroom, someone entered with Alan's own hunting rifle. 2 fatal shots ended their lives within seconds. The weapon was left in the hallway, wrapped in a blue bathrobe. The house showed no signs of forced entry. Sarah told police she was asleep when she heard noises, then panicked and ran for help. At first, officers treated her like a witness, but details didn't add up. She showed no signs of forced entry, no unknown footprints, and neighbors didn't see any suspicious cars. As detectives searched the house, they noticed something unusual. Sarah's pink bathrobe in the laundry, stained faintly with blood and containing gunshot residue. A latex glove with Diane's blood and Sarah's DNA was found in a trash can outside. The rifle used in the attack belonged to her father, taken from the home's unlocked gun cabinet. Investigators pieced together a chilling theory. Sarah waited until her parents were asleep, entered their room, and used her father's rifle. Then, she attempted to stage it as a break-in. Motive, control, freedom, and her forbidden relationship. Sarah was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial began in February 2005. Prosecutors argued she acted out of anger after being told to end her relationship with Bruno. They brought forensic experts who testified about blood patterns, gunshot residue, and the placement of the rifle. The evidence on her bathrobe became one of the most decisive points in the case. The defense claimed Sarah was innocent, that someone else entered the home, possibly targeting her father's business. They argued that police had rushed to judgment because she didn't behave how people expected a grieving daughter to act. But the physical evidence left little room for doubt. After nearly 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only a few hours. Sarah Johnson was found guilty on both counts. She was sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 15 additional years for using a firearm. Today, Sarah is imprisoned at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. She has continued to maintain that she is innocent. Several appeals and requests for new trials have been denied. Her boyfriend at the time, Bruno Santos, was never charged in connection to the crime. The Johnson family home was eventually torn down. Alan and Diane's relatives have spoken publicly, only to express grief and disbelief, a family destroyed from within, not by strangers, but by the person they had raised and loved. A teenager, once seen as promising, is now serving life behind bars, reminding us how quickly love, control, and anger can turn a home into the scene of tragedy. Number 9. Erin Caffey. The fire started just before dawn on the 1st of March 2008 in Emory, Texas. Flames tore through the Caffey family home, and neighbors awoke to gunshots and the sound of shattering glass. Inside, a family was under attack, and the person behind it was someone no one suspected, their 6-year-old daughter, Erin Caffey. Erin grew up in what seemed like a loving, faith-centered home. Her parents, Terry and Penny Caffey, were devoted to their children. Erin, her 3-year-old brother Matthew, and 8-year-old brother Tyler. But behind closed doors, arguments brewed when Erin began secretly dating one 8-year-old Charlie Wilkinson, a boy her parents felt was reckless and dangerous. When they found out about the relationship, they banned her from seeing him. Erin felt betrayed. What followed wasn't teenage rebellion, it was a plan that crossed every moral line. Erin convinced Charlie that the only way for them to be together was to remove her family. Charlie agreed and brought his friend, 20-year-old Charles Wade. In the early hours of March 1, Erin waited in a car down the road while the two broke into her family's home, armed with guns and knives. Terry and Penny were attacked first. Both were shot. Penny did not survive. Terry, despite serious wounds, managed to crawl out of the house. Then, the attackers moved to the boys' rooms. Matthew and Tyler were killed. To erase evidence, they set the house on fire. From outside, Erin sat in the car listening, watching the glow of her childhood home burn. But the plan didn't end the way she imagined. Terry survived. Barely conscious and severely injured, he crawled over 300 feet to a neighbor's home. He was rushed to the hospital. When he regained consciousness, he told investigators what little he remembered and made one comment that stunned them. He believed his daughter was involved. Within hours, police located Erin, Charlie, and Charles at a friend's trailer. Erin first denied everything. But confronted with evidence and witness statements, she broke down and confessed to planning the attack. The community was in disbelief. How could a 6-year-old orchestrate the deaths of her own family? Was she manipulated or was she in control the entire time? Prosecutors argued she was the mastermind. Her cooperation, her planning, and her lack of panic proved she understood exactly what she was doing. Erin was charged as an adult. She pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and received 2 consecutive life sentences plus 25 years. This means she won't be eligible for parole until at least 2078, when she will be in her 80s. Charlie Wilkinson and Charles Wade both received life sentences without the possibility of parole. A fourth person, their accomplice Bobby Johnson, who helped plan and drove them, received 40 years. Despite everything, what makes this case even more extraordinary is Erin's father, Terry Caffey. After losing his wife and 2 sons and surviving an attempt on his own life, he eventually forgave Erin. He visits her in prison and has publicly said he believes in redemption. Today, Erin sits in a Texas women's prison, far from the prison life she once had. She has expressed regret in interviews and letters, claiming she wishes she could take it back. Whether it was teenage manipulation, emotional turmoil, or something deeper, the result was the same: a home destroyed, a family shattered, and a father choosing forgiveness over hate. Number 10. Diane Zamora. It began not in the shadows of a troubled home, but in the bright promise of 2 teenagers destined for greatness. Diane Zamora and David Graham were the kind of students schools proudly showcased honor roll, military-bound, disciplined, and ambitious. But in December 1995, their names became synonymous not with achievement, but with a crime driven by jealousy, obsession, and a twisted idea of loyalty. Diane grew up in a strict, achievement-focused household in Texas. She was intelligent, disciplined, and determined to become a Navy officer. David Graham, equally accomplished, was an Air Force Academy candidate, popular, athletic, and confident. When the two met at a Civil Air Patrol event, they instantly connected. Their relationship quickly became intense, possessive, and emotionally volatile. Everything changed when David admitted to Diane that he had a one-time encounter with one 6-year-old classmate, Adrienne Jones. To Diane, it wasn't a mistake, it was betrayal. She demanded he prove his love in an unthinkable way, by taking Adrienne's life. David agreed. On the night of the 4th of December 1995, they set their plan into motion. David called Adrienne, offering to pick her up under the pretense of going for a drive. Adrienne, smart, athletic, a member of the school track team, had no idea she was being led to her death. Diane hid in the back of the car as David drove to a deserted area near Grand Prairie, Texas. There, the confrontation began. David struck Adrienne with a barbell weight. Injured and terrified, she tried to run. Diane, stepping forward for the final act, used David's gun. Adrian's life ended in a field under a cold Texas sky. The couple left her body and drove away like it never happened. Shockingly, within months, both Diane and David went on with their lives as if nothing had changed. Diane entered the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. David reported to the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. The crime went unsolved. Investigators struggled to find leads, and no one suspected the disciplined couple in uniform. Everything unraveled about a year later. David confessed to a roommate during a late-night conversation. Word spread, and soon military authorities contacted Texas police. In September 1996, both were arrested, Diane at the Naval Academy, David at the Air Force Academy. Their elite futures ended in handcuffs. The trial gained national attention. Prosecutors portrayed Diane as controlling and consumed by jealousy, and David as willing to do anything to keep her love. The diary entries, taped confessions, and forensic evidence were undeniable. Both were convicted of capital murder. Because they were 17 and 18 at the time of the crime, neither could receive the death penalty. Instead, Texas law mandated life in prison with the possibility of parole only after serving 40 years. Their first chance at release will come in the mid-2030s. Today, Diane Zamora is incarcerated at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. David Graham remains in a separate Texas prison. They are no longer in contact. Adrian Jones, the girl whose life was cut short over pride and jealousy, is remembered by her family as bright, kind, and full of potential. Her death changed Texas law enforcement approaches to teenage violence and shook communities across the nation. Two of the most promising students in Texas threw away military careers, futures, and freedom not for survival or revenge, but for twisted loyalty to a teenage promise. A life was taken, and two more were effectively lost.